Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive with us today.
Glad to be here.
We're going to be looking at Morgan Housel's Same as Ever. Have you heard this one?
I have. Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, so for anyone listening who maybe hasn't heard of this one, it's a really fascinating book. It explores this idea that, while the world's always changing, right, human nature stays pretty much the same as ever.
Yeah, Housel's great at explaining like really complex ideas, things about finance, history, psychology, all that, and making it really engaging and clear.
Yeah, he really is. He's a partner at the Collaborative Fund, and he's a pretty well-known author in this space. And so in Same as Ever, he's really diving deep into these like timeless principles of human behavior,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to money and investing.
Right.
And so today we'll be kind of unpacking some of the most surprising and I think thought-provoking ideas from the book. And the goal is to help you listening understand how recognizing these like unchanging human tendencies can help you make better choices.
Yeah.
Even in a world that feels like it's constantly changing, right?
Yeah.
So are you ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So one of the first things that really kind of hit me in Same as Ever was Housel's take on expectations
Okay.
and how they shape our happiness. He argues that our happiness is like way more dependent on managing our expectations than almost any other factor.
Right.
It's so easy to get caught up in comparing yourself to others and feeling like you always need more stuff to be happy.
It's true.
But Housel points out that this constant chasing after more and more can actually make us less happy, not more.
It's like you're always trying to reach this destination, but the finish line just keeps moving further and further away.
Exactly, and you never get there.
Yeah.
And Housel, he uses this really interesting example from the 1950s.
Okay.
A lot of people look back on the 1950s with this like rose-colored glasses.
Mm-hmm.
They think of it as a simpler time when people were happier. But objectively speaking, people had a lot less back then. Smaller houses, lower incomes, limited technology.
Yeah, much less stuff.
Right, so what made them so content? Housel says it wasn't about what they had, but about what they expected.
Yeah, their expectations were more in line with their reality. They weren't constantly seeing images of like luxury lifestyles and feeling like they were falling short.
It really makes you think about the impact of social media today, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We're constantly bombarded with these like perfect curated versions of other people's lives, and it's so easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves and feeling inadequate.
Yeah, it's like this never-ending highlight reel.
It is, and Housel brings up this great quote from Charlie Munger here. He says, "The first rule of a happy life is low expectations."
That's a good one.
It is, right? It might sound kind of pessimistic at first,
Yeah.
but it's not about settling for less or giving up on your dreams.
It's more about being realistic and recognizing that constantly chasing after more and more can lead to disappointment.
Exactly. So what does this mean for us, like practically speaking?
Well, I think it starts with being mindful of the messages we're consuming, especially on social media. Are we letting those curated images dictate our happiness? Are we letting them define success for us?
Right. And it's also about appreciating what we already have.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Gratitude is huge. It's a powerful antidote to that feeling of like never having enough.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about another big idea from Same as Ever. Risk is what you don't see.
Oh, okay.
Housel tells this crazy story about Victor Prather, a NASA astronaut who drowned after a successful high-altitude balloon test.
I remember that one.
Can you believe that?
It's wild. It just shows that even with the best planning, you can't account for everything.
And it's those things you don't even think about that can really get you.
Exactly. There's this great quote from financial advisor Carl Richards. He says, "Risk is what's left over when you think you've thought of everything."
That's so true. We spend so much time worrying about the risks we know about, but it's the unknown unknowns that can really blindside us.
It's like life is full of curveballs.
It is, you just never know when one is going to come flying at you.
You don't.
And think about major economic shocks like the Great Depression. They often seem so obvious in retrospect.
Right. Like, how could people have not seen it coming?
But at the time, very few people did get it. Housel talks about this thing called hindsight bias.
Yeah.
It makes us think that past events were more predictable than they actually were.
Makes sense.
It's easy to look back and say, oh, that was so obvious, but in the moment, it's a different story.
Totally.
So how do you prepare for risks? You can't even imagine. Housel says we should think like people who live in earthquake zones.
Okay. How's that?
You can't stop an earthquake from happening, but you can make sure your building is up to code and you have an emergency plan in place.
Right. So you're prepared for the worst case scenario.
Exactly. And when it comes to personal finance, this means saving more than you think you'll need and taking on less debt than you think you can handle.
It's about building a buffer for those unexpected events.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, a buffer for those financial curveballs.
Hey.
Now, this next topic from Same as Ever really made me laugh. Housel talks about how bad we are at understanding probability.
Oh, yeah.
We tend to overestimate the likelihood of rare events, especially when they're like really vivid or emotionally charged. You know,
Right.
like we worry about plane crashes even though driving is way more dangerous statistically.
It's true. We focus on the dramatic stuff, even if it's less likely to happen.
And he uses this hilarious example from Jerry Seinfeld.
Oh, I love Seinfeld.
Seinfeld jokes about not being worried about his old car not having airbags. Because he's like, how often do you really need one?
Yeah, that's so Seinfeld.
It is, right. But
Yeah.
it's a great point. We're so bad at intuitively grasping those odds.
We really are.
We worry about these unlikely events, but then we underestimate the risks of everyday things, the things we do without even thinking about it.
Right. It's like we're on autopilot.
We are, and I think this ties into our desire for certainty.
Yeah.
You know, we want to believe that we can predict and control everything, but the truth is, a lot of life is just chance.
It's uncomfortable to admit that, but it's true.
It is, and that's where the importance of sample size comes in. It's hard to make accurate predictions when we only have a few data points.
Wait, like, how many recessions have you lived through?
Not enough to draw any big conclusions.
Exactly. Yet we see all these experts making bold predictions about the economy.
They act like they have it all figured out.
And we want to believe them.
We do. They crave that certainty.
We do.
And, you know, with the internet and social media, we're constantly bombarded with news about these, like, once-in-a-lifetime events, you know,
It's true.
which can make the world seem much more chaotic and unpredictable than it really is.
It's like the news is always focused on the negative, the scary stuff.
It is. If it bleeds, it leads, right?
Exactly.
So how do we navigate this world of probability and uncertainty, especially when it comes to making financial decisions?
Well, I think it starts with being aware of our biases. You know, those mental shortcuts we take that can lead us astray.
Like thinking that we're somehow immune to bad luck,
Exactly. We're thinking that we're smarter than everyone else.
or that we can time the market perfectly.
Right? All those little delusions.
We all have them.
We do.
So how do we overcome them?
Well, I think it's about being humble, recognizing that we don't know everything, and being open to learning from our mistakes.
And when it comes to investing, I think it's about focusing on the things we can control,
Like what?
like saving consistently, investing in a diversified portfolio, and having a long-term perspective.
Right. It's about playing the long game and not getting caught up in those short-term fluctuations.
Exactly. And I think that's a great place to leave it for today.
Sounds good.
We'll be back in a moment with part 2 of our deep dive into Morgan Housel's Same as Ever. Welcome back to our deep dive into Same as Ever. You know, we've been talking about how human behavior often plays a bigger role in our financial decisions than we think.
Yeah, and Housel brings up this point that's kind of hard to grasp. Sometimes long-term progress, it's so slow, it's subtle, you don't even notice it.
It's like we're programmed for instant gratification.
Yeah.
You know, we want to see results right away. But real progress, especially when it comes to things like building wealth or, you know, societal change, it often takes time.
It does. He uses a great example, the decline of heart disease deaths in the U.S.
Okay.
Between 1950 and 2014, the death rate from heart disease, it went down a whopping 70%.
Wow, that's amazing. You'd think that would be like front page news.
Yeah, you would, right.
But we rarely hear about it, do we?
No, we don't. And that's because it happens so gradually, like an average of 1.5% per year.
It's like those small wins adding up over time.
Exactly, the compound effect.
Yeah, like a bamboo tree.
Oh, yeah.
Takes years for the roots to grow, and then seemingly overnight it shoots up like crazy.
Exactly. And this applies to so many things like economic growth.
Okay.
Over the past century, GDP per capita in the U.S. has gone up like 8 times. That's an average annual growth rate in the single digits compounded over decades.
But we always focus on the short-term stuff. You know,
Yeah.
the daily ups and downs.
Yeah, we get caught up in the noise.
So how can we apply this idea of slow, steady progress to our own lives, especially our finances?
Well, I think it's about cultivating patience and discipline. You know, trusting in the power of compounding and recognizing that real wealth, it's usually built slowly and steadily, not overnight.
Okay, this next idea from the book is a little bit unsettling, but I think it's important. Housel talks about how fragile the world really is. How even seemingly insignificant events can have huge unforeseen consequences.
It's true. He actually shares a story from his own life about a near-death experience while he was skiing with friends.
Oh, wow.
He got caught in a small avalanche but decided to call it a day, luckily, because his friends later got killed in a massive avalanche on the same slope.
That's so scary. It's like a reminder that sometimes no matter how much we plan, we're just not in control.
We're not. And he applies this idea to history, too, like
Huh.
how a slight change in the wind could have led to George Washington's army being captured during the Revolutionary War.
Wow, that would change everything.
Right, or the sinking of the Lusitania. The ship was delayed by a day because the captain wanted to save money on fuel.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
A seemingly minor decision with huge consequences.
Huge, and it propelled the U.S. into World War I.
It's like the butterfly effect, right? Those tiny actions that ripple out and change the course of history.
Exactly. It's kind of mind-blowing.
So is Housel saying that everything is just random chaos? That we have no control at all?
No, not exactly. He's not saying we should give up on planning or making thoughtful decisions.
Right. But he's saying that we need to accept the things we can't control.
Right, and focus on what we can control, like our own actions, our own preparations.
So for listeners out there, what's the takeaway here?
I think it's about recognizing that the world is a lot more fragile and unpredictable than we often think.
And that we need to be prepared for the unexpected.
Yeah, like having a backup plan, having an emergency fund.
It's about building resilience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't always prevent bad things from happening, but you can prepare for them.
Okay, so let's switch gears again. Housel reminds us that we often misinterpret information, especially when it comes to complex subjects like, economics or finance. We tend to oversimplify things, look for easy answers.
Yeah, we want to make sense of the world, even if it means ignoring the messy reality.
He uses the example of the Great Depression.
Okay.
Looking back, it seems obvious that a huge crash was coming, after the Roaring '20s.
Yeah.
But at the time, very few people saw it coming.
Hindsight is 20/20.
It is a realist, even a year into the Great Depression. Leading economists were more worried about things like prohibition and crime than about unemployment.
Wow. It's crazy how our understanding of events can be so clouded by the information we have at the time.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to understand a puzzle, but we're missing half the pieces.
It's a good analogy.
And this applies to our understanding of the present as well, right? We're constantly bombarded with information, but it's only a tiny fraction of what's actually happening.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
It is, and we make decisions based on this incomplete data.
And our own biases. It's kind of humbling, isn't it?
It is, but in a way, it's also freeing,
How so?
It frees us from the need to have all the answers.
Yeah,
It allows us to be okay with not knowing everything.
that's a good point. So how can we avoid making decisions based on bad information or limited perspectives?
I think it's about approaching information with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Okay.
Recognizing that there's always more to the story than we see, and that our understanding is constantly evolving.
It's about being curious, being open to new information, and admitting when we're wrong.
Exactly. No one has all the answers.
Now let's go back to expectations for a minute. Remember how Housel says that happiness is about how our circumstances align with our expectations?
Yeah.
He uses the example of the 1950s again. That time when people were supposedly so much happier,
Okay.
even though they had less stuff.
Right.
He says it's because they had fewer points of comparison. They weren't constantly bombarded with images of perfect lives and fancy things.
Yeah, social media wasn't a thing back then. It's like we've created this culture of comparison and it's making us miserable.
It's true. We're always trying to keep up with the Joneses.
And the Joneses are always posting their highlight reel.
Exactly.
So how do we break free from this cycle of comparison and find more contentment?
I think it starts with gratitude. Taking the time to appreciate what we already have.
And being mindful of the messages we're consuming.
Right? Are we letting those external influences dictate our happiness? Are we defining success on our own terms?
That's a good question to ask ourselves. And I think that's a good place to pause for now.
Okay.
We'll be back in a moment with part 3 of our deep dive into Same as Ever. Welcome back to our deep dive into Morgan Housel's Same as Ever. We've been talking about all these timeless principles of human behavior, especially when it comes to, money and investing.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey so far.
It has. And as we wrap up our exploration, I'm curious, what are some of the key takeaways that have really stood out to you?
Well, one that really hit home for me is Housel's point about aligning your financial goals with your personal values. It's not just about stacking up cash for no reason. It's about using money to build a life that actually means something to you, a fulfilling life.
I totally agree. It's such an important shift in perspective. It's not about chasing some like external definition of success. It's about defining success for yourself.
Exactly.
And I think that leads us to like one of the most important takeaways from the book. True wealth, it's not just about how much money you have. It's about having control over your time, your choices, your life.
Yeah, it's about having the freedom to, do what you love, spend time with people you care about, make a difference in the world.
And that freedom, that sense of autonomy, it often comes from having a strong financial foundation.
It does. It's not about getting rich quick. It's about making smart choices, managing risk, building a nest egg that gives you that sense of security and peace of mind.
Okay, so let's get practical. What are some things people can actually do to build that financial well-being and freedom?
Well, Housel has some great suggestions, like having a financial plan. Think of it like a roadmap. It outlines your goals, your income, your expenses, your investment strategy.
It's about taking a big picture view of your finances and making sure everything is aligned with your values and goals.
Exactly. He also talks about automating good habits, like setting up automatic savings contributions or using budgeting apps to keep track of your spending.
Automating those good habits is so important, it takes the guesswork out of it.
And it's way easier than trying to make those decisions every day.
Another thing he emphasizes is finding good financial education and advice from sources you trust. Whether that's reading books, going to workshops, talking to a financial advisor. It's about equipping yourself with the knowledge to make smart choices.
Yeah, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to money.
Okay, so let's talk about contentment for a minute.
Yeah.
In today's world, it's so easy to get caught up in this constant striving for more money, more stuff, more achievements.
We forget to appreciate what we already have.
Exactly. And that can lead to feeling like we're never enough, never where we need to be.
It's a never-ending cycle.
So how do we break free from that and find more contentment in our lives?
Well, Housel talks about cultivating gratitude. Taking time each day to appreciate the good things in your life, your relationships, your health, your experiences, even the simple things.
It's about shifting our focus from what we lack to what we have.
Exactly. And it's about making an effort to see the positive in things instead of dwelling on the negative.
It's so easy to focus on the negative, isn't it?
It is, but it's a choice. We can choose to focus on the good things even when things are tough.
And I think that ties into managing expectations too. If we set realistic expectations and focus on the things we can control, it's a lot easier to be content with where we are.
It's about finding that balance, between striving for more and being grateful for what we have.
Okay, so let's talk about luck for a minute. It's something that a lot of people are uncomfortable talking about, but it plays a huge role in our lives.
It does. It can be hard to admit because it challenges this idea that we're in complete control of our destiny.
Right.
But as Housel points out, sometimes it's just about being in the right place at the right time. Sometimes it's about who you know.
And sometimes it's just plain dumb luck.
Yeah, sometimes you just get lucky.
But we can't just sit around waiting for good things to happen, right?
No, we have to create opportunities for luck.
How do you do that?
By being open to new experiences, by connecting with people, by being curious about the world.
I love that. So step outside your comfort zone and meet new people, try new things. You never know what might happen.
Exactly. You might just get lucky. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Same as Ever, I think the biggest takeaway for me is this idea that financial freedom, it's not just about having tons of money. It's about having control over your time, your choices, your life.
It's about aligning your financial goals with your values and creating a life that truly matters to you.
It's a powerful message.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that money is just a tool.
It is.
It's a means to an end, not the end itself. So use it wisely.
Build a financial plan that supports your vision for a good life. Invest in your health, your relationships, your passions, your community, and most importantly, find joy in the journey.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Morgan Housel's Same as Ever.
We hope you found it insightful, and we encourage you to check out the book for yourself.
You might just discover some timeless wisdom that changes your perspective on money and life.
And that's it for today. Thanks for listening.